screen. Thank you. And okay, Shmuley, you're first on. So let's have a look at 3.1, the anti-conversion enactment
of the Syrian Magen David congregation in Brooklyn, New York, established in 1935, and its reaffirmation by successive communal leaders in 46, 72, 84, and 2006.
Well, the Syrians came to the Americas, both North and South America, in the first half of the 20th century, set up communities in Buenos Aires and in New York, Brooklyn in particular, and they pronounce it Magen David. And this is one of their very oldest shuls. Syrians from both Damascus and Aleppo or Khaled. In 1935, on the advice of their rabbis, they made a takana. They said, we are not going to recognize any conversions carried out in the Americas, either South America or North America. And to this day, they do not recognize any conversion. Could be the most orthodox conversion, somebody who was converted to Judaism, not allowed to marry into the Syrian Jewish community. And the Syrians have been quite successful in keeping their community, as it were, at least halachically Jewish. And in general, they tend to do things together, and they don't tend to marry out if they can help it at all. But one way of responding to the problem of conversion, when you're living in a society which is secular, when most Jews do not observe the commandments, is to say, well, no conversion today can be a valid conversion. Very much in line with Rabbi Breisch's Chidush, his novel point that when we're living in an age of national Judaism and not religious Judaism, conversion from a halachic perspective is mostly not going to be sincere. So the Syrians said, we're not going to get involved with it at all. We don't recognize conversions. Number two, the other side, of course, is always the swing side. In other words, those who say, but we need conversion in order to make people really Jewish and in order to keep our numbers up. Now, in the 1970s, some rabbis came out to speak in the Midwest, particularly to the Jewish community of Denver. They talked about assimilation and the lack of Jewish numbers. So the rabbi, the one Orthodox rabbi in Denver called Rabbi Stanley Wagner, decided that they were going to do something about this. Numbers were being lost and Jewish identity was in danger. In other words, Denver was becoming more and more full of people who were converted by Reform, by Conservative, and you met Jews socially in Denver, but many of them were not halachically suitable for marriage because their conversion was not Orthodox. So what did Rabbi Wagner decide to do? Jack, it's up to you now, please. Line 6, Denver Conversion Project.
Denver Conversion Project in the USA, initiated by the Orthodox Rabbi Stanley Wagner. The program consisted of Jewish education offered by rabbis of all denominations relating to basic matters such as the commitment to the basic Jewish observances of Sabbath, of Shabbat, and Kashrut.
So what he said was, you know what, I'm the Orthodox rabbi here. He went to the Reform rabbi and to the Conservative rabbi and to anyone else who was an official rabbi. So let's make an educational program which we can all participate in. Shaveh l'chol nefesh. We'll tell the candidates about Shabbat, Kashrut, importance of going to a prayer service, giving charity, teaching your children Torah, and each rabbi will instruct his candidates or her candidates in accordance with their understanding of this program. But what's the important point, Jack? Line 9, the actual conversion.
The actual conversion ceremony would be performed by an Orthodox Bet Din. The project was criticized by the Orthodox establishment from its inception.
So from the very beginning, Rabbi Wagner had this idea, got together with Reform, Conservative, and other rabbis, and did what we've talked about in the last Shiur. Let's have an Orthodox Bet Din, do the actual conversion, and leave the issue of sincerity for what Rabbi Godzinski said, the Achiezer. Nothing during the conversion ceremony implies that the candidates will not be halachically observant. You don't ask them any questions. You don't push the point. You simply make them into gerim. This is done by the Batei Din Ligiyur in Israel, set up by Rabbi Unterman, and continuing to this day, especially in the army, a program called Nativ, where halachically non-Jewish soldiers in the IDF undergo a course, and then they're converted by an Orthodox Bet Din. No questions asked as to what you'll be doing in the future. Now, from the very beginning, New York, Chicago, Boston, all criticized Rabbi Wagner and threatened to strike his community off the roll of the Orthodox RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America. But in the end, Rabbi Wagner himself canceled the program. Why? Can we get the last line, please, Jack? But it folded.
But it folded once the Reform movement accepted the patrilineal principle in establishing Jewish identity.
So this is kind of a bit frustrating. Here's Rabbi Wagner trying hard to produce some kind of formal unity between Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, at least as far as Jewish identity is concerned. Every person who calls him or herself a Jew in Denver and has undergone a Giyur will have an Orthodox Giyur, no matter what they actually practice or believe, for the sake of Jewish unity. But then up comes the Reform movement to say, well, you know what? Previously, it's been the mother being Jewish that makes your Jewish identity. But we're going to open it up to the father as well. Once that took place, Rabbi Wagner lost his legitimacy because, you're being stabbed in the back. You're struggling to get everything into an Orthodox umbrella. And then the Reform movement comes and says, well, I'm just going to step outside, and anybody who has a Jewish father will be recognized as Jewish. So it collapsed.
Well, it probably saved him from being struck off, didn't it, Wagner?
It
The
also
Reform
saved
did the
him
dirty
being,
work.
it also saved him being struck off. But again, he was only threatened. They never actually struck him off until he basically folded on his own initiative the program, and then there was no need to threaten him anymore. But you understand how in Chutz La'aretz, it's very fraught. Conversion is very fraught. But let's see what happened, and you're next, Ian, in Israel, line 12. Thank you, Jack. Ian, line 12, the
Israeli Ne'eman Committee, 97 to 98, after some 70 sessions and 150 hours of deliberations.
We Jews do a lot of talking.
Recommended the creation of panels of rabbis representing all three movements in modern Judaism to prepare candidates for conversion.
Same thing as the
ritual itself.
Same thing as the Denver project, okay? Let's have an Orthodox Bet Din. The conversion ritual itself, Ian,
would be performed by Orthodox rabbis only. The committee's proposals were rejected by the Israeli chief rabbinate in 98.
Again, the Israeli chief rabbinate said, no, definitely not. We don't have anything to do with Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, only Orthodox from beginning to end. So you've got...
And the committee didn't know that at the beginning? The committee didn't know that at the beginning, that the chief rabbinate would refuse?
Ian, how long
have
middle-of-the-road Orthodox Jews try to advance programs, okay, that are going to be a little softer and more welcoming, and the Haredi branch comes in and says, not on your Nelly, as it were. not going to let you do it. That's the story of, those who mourn the United Synagogue in England, okay? Something which is able to be an umbrella. Or like Jonathan Sachs's The Dignity of Difference. Yes, we can be different, but we can all be under the same umbrella, not in terms of the Haredi camp, okay? And the rejectionists usually have their way. Is that not correct, Ian? By and large, in debates in Orthodoxy. But let's have a look at the courts. 917, you may remember there was a controversy involving the late Rabbi Chaim Druckmann, alav shalom, okay? Head of Bnei Akiva Yeshivot, one of the leading lights of the religious Zionist movement. Correct, Jean?
Mm-hmm.
Rabbi Druckmann. Now, Rabbi Druckmann was the head for many years of the special rabbinical courts for Giur, for conversion in Israel. The one started by Rabbi Untermann's idea. Nativ, the army, makes conversion fairly easy, doesn't ask too many questions. All the rabbis sitting in these courts are Orthodox rabbis. And we saw Rabbi Goren try to limit it to Israel only, and we saw how that was a spectacular failure, okay? Now, what happened in 2008 was that a woman came to the Ashdod District Rabbinical Court, said, I want to get. I can't live with my husband anymore. Our marriage has come to an end. I need to get. So Rabbi Atiyah, who was the one Dayan on the court, said, okay, let's open your file and see who you are. And so she reports that she's a convert, a Gioret, converted by the special rabbinical courts a few years ago. The whole organization is headed by Rav Druckmann. Rav Atiyah says, madam, you don't need to get. You're not Jewish, nor are your children Jewish. I don't recognize the conversion of these special rabbinical courts. As far as I'm concerned, you're still not Jewish. You don't need to get. You were never married. And I'm going to pass your name or the name of your two children to the Rabbanut to put on the list of Pesulei Chitun, those in Israel who are not allowed to marry Jews because they're not halakhically Jewish. You are a Gentile. Woman got a big shock. She came for a get and then lost to Judaism. So she turned to lawyers and NGOs, and they appealed to the Supreme Rabbinical Appeals Court. Now, the very existence of the Rabbinical Appeals Court is not very halachic, because there are no appeals in Jewish law. We might talk about that another time as we go through thousands of tshuvot in the world of the Responsa. But we do have in Israel, as a compromise with the British, we have an appeals court, okay? So you can appeal. And what the Supreme Rabbinical Appeals Court decided was, to the surprise of the woman and her lawyers, was that they agreed with Rabbi Atiyah, and they just happened to come up with a particularly hard line Haredi Bet Din, Rabbis Sherman, Schoenfeld, and Isra, who are very Haredi, and they said, okay, you know what, we agree. We think this whole rabbinical conversion court system is a sham. And then they said Rabbi Druckmann is a Rasha. He's evil. Why is he evil? Because he's going along with something which is against halakha. Going back to Rav Breish, we know these converts are not going to be living an ultra-Orthodox lifestyle. They won't be keeping every jot and tittle of halakha. So therefore, we don't want them, and we don't recognize their conversion. So there. And all these dayanim are psulim. They are unfit to be dayanim. So all hell broke loose, of course. And the prime minister leaned on the Sephardi chief rabbi, Rabbi Amar, to do something about this, because the whole country was, as I said, up in arms. You have thousands of non-Jews who converted by these special rabbinical appeals court, right? Special rabbinical conversions court. Many of them as young people serving in the IDF. And what? We're good enough to die for Israel, but we can't be Jews?
And children.
And of course, the children of all these converted women. Are they all going to be declared Gentiles? So Rabbi Amar went to the Tel Aviv District Rabbinical Court and found 3 nice elderly Moroccan Dayanim in Tel Aviv who said, of course, this woman is Jewish, her children are Jewish, and they gave her back her Judaism. They followed Rabbi Unterman, they followed Rabbi Grodzinski, and they said a couple of things. They said, look, Supreme Rabbinical Appeals Court, you never asked Rabbi Druckmann to explain his position. One doesn't do that in a bet din. Okay, shamoa ben achechem ushvatatem tzedek. We have to hear both sides to the case. Secondly, there's a principle of courtesy between courts. And where is the courtesy and where is the respect? So you will ask me how the matter ended with a Tel Aviv District Court against the Supreme Rabbinical Appeals Court. And as I just mentioned to you in Halakha, there's no such thing as an appeal from a bet din. Beidina batar beidina la daiki, says the Gemara in Bava Batra. A bet din can correct itself if you can convince it, but you cannot appeal. In London, for example, there's no appeal against the Beth Din, nor in the Beth Din of America. The Beth Din of America, however, does have a special appeals process, but it's not binding like in secular law. What we say is that a Bet Din will listen to the words of a Bet Din of greater rabbis. If you make a Bet Din with really great rabbis, then you may convince a less great Bet Din to listen and accept what the Bet Din of the great rabbis is concerned. Rav Kook, in fact, created this solution because during the British Mandate, the rabbinical courts were told that they have to follow principles of natural justice. They have to be fair, and appeals is a matter of fairness under English law and also under most modern legal systems. So Rav Kook said, okay, we'll make a court of the greatest rabbis. We'll call it a rabbinical appeals court, even though there's no such thing as a right to an appeal. But we bank on the fact that we can ask the rabbinical courts to listen. So because it's only a matter of convention to listen, you don't really need to stop the process with the appeals court. You can actually end it up with a district court. So Rabbi Amar said, well, that's fine. The district court has the final word, and the woman is restored to her Jewishness. Now she has to go back to the rabbinical court in Ashdod and try and get a get. By the way, what the Tel Aviv District Rabbinical Court said when it looked into the case was that when the woman had converted, she actually was keeping most of the mitzvot and sending her children to a religious school. Her Israeli husband, who was Jewish born, basically made fun of her and made it difficult for her to keep a kosher home or to observe Shabbat. So because of the Jewish side, she became a non-observant person. And that was why Rabbi Atiyah said, I don't recognize your conversion. So all this is a little bit of the detail one can give about these cases. The High Court of Justice, the Bagatz, Israeli Supreme Court, sitting as a court that deals with the justice of causes between private individuals and government agencies, that court can't interfere with the substance of halakha, but it can tell the rabbinical court that you're out of line, either because you've exceeded your jurisdiction or you're not keeping to natural justice. High Court of Justice said the week before the Supreme Rabbinical Appeals Court gave its decision, Rabbi Sherman gave a lecture criticizing the special conversion court. So he was biased. He should have recused himself. Secondly, it also cited the Latin tag audi alteram partem. Anybody know what that means? Audi alteram partem. You have to listen to both sides to a dispute. It's on the front of the ancient house of the mayor in Delft. Okay, if you go there, you'll see written in big letters, Audi, Ultra, Partem. You listen to both sides. So they didn't summon Rabbi Druckmann or any representative. Then there's the issue of respect between courts. And that's basically just to give you some idea of what happens in the 21st century. This is still a live issue, and it will continue to preoccupy us in the future. All this was because of Rambam on the slave girl and the young Jewish man. Responsa, they deal with real life. Let's move on to the Karaites. Now, who are the Karaites and what is Karaism? Let's see, who else do we have here? Julian Liu, do you like to read in English? If you do, if you unmute, I'll be happy to have you read about Karaism.
Traditionally, the Karaites, Jews who insist that only the written Torah is binding and who reject the oral one as transmitted by the rabbis, are regarded as an offshoot of the Sadducees and the Bermusians. Tzadok over Tusim.
Vitus, exactly, in Second Temple times. So we know about the existence of Karaites. They exist to this day. The word kara, mikra, means what's written in scripture. It's very similar, in fact, to Martin Luther's sola scriptum. We only follow what's written in the Bible. All the rest is commentary by rabbis who invented it. And the Karaites, according to traditionalists, started in Second Temple times. But historians, and this is interesting, Julian, will you give us another line, please?
Historians, including Rabbi Abraham David in his Sefer HaKabbalah, tend to date the origin of Karaisim to the Gaonic period between 7th and 9th centuries and identify Anan ben David, 715-795, as the movement's major founder.
So it's a bit like the Zohar, okay? When did it start? We're not sure. The tradition says these Karaites and Shem Mikra Jews, nobody says they're not Jews, they started in Second Temple times already. And we'll see how the Rambam also subscribes to that. But Rabbi Abraham ben David was a Spanish authority, very interesting philosopher, wrote a book called Emunah Rama, which created quite a stir, but it's basically faded into obscurity. He lived in the 12th century in Spain, and he wrote a history of Judaism. And he, because he was very anti-Karaite, he says, no, you Karaites are very recent. There was somebody called Anan ben David, with great organizational talents, and he says, that is Avraham ben David, the first Raavad. There are 3 Raavads in Jewish rabbinical history. The Raavad to criticize the Rambam is number 3. There are 2 before him. This is number 1. And in his Sefer Kabbalah, he says it dates to Anan ben David, and it was a movement during the Gaonic period for all sorts of reasons. I'm not going to go into that now, but okay. Karaites. Fabia, would you like to read? Can you unmute? Wonderful. The Golden Age.
The Golden Age of Karaism took place between 900 and 1100, during which Jacob Kirkisani produced the major code of Karaite law.
So you can look up Anan ben David and Kirkisani in your own time, okay, using Rabbi Wikipedia, all right? But there's a major code of Karaite law, so it flourished during this period, which does in fact point to the fact that it may be not a direct descendant of Tzedukim and Baitusim, but a movement that emerged out of all sorts of factors in the Islamic world at that period of time. Fabia, Egypt had long been
a bastion of the Karaite movement, and in the Golden Age, Karaites obtained high social positions such as royal physicians, government officials, and tax collectors. Some were members of the Egyptian court. Karaite scholars were also active in the Muslim theological debates of the time and were prominent in the Kalam movement, so strongly rejected by Maimonides.
So, Karaites turn out to be a powerful lot in Egypt, where Rambam, Maimonides, is going to end up. They hold a lot of the key positions. They are wealthy, very well educated, interested in the Torah, shebichtav. They are irritated by the details of rabbinic law, and they have a lot of clout with the royal family and the Sultan. So what are you going to do with this group of people? Well, anyhow, before that, let's have a look at a brief synopsis of major Karaite doctrines. All right, let's start with Shabbat. Fabia, one more.
Karaites do not practice the ritual of lighting Shabbat candles.
And that's something you may have heard. The one thing you may know about Karaites is no Shabbat candles and no fire or light in their dwellings during Shabbat. They have a differing interpretation of the Torah verse.
You shall not burn, to va'aru, the PL form of ba'ar. You shall not burn a fire in any of your dwellings on the day of Shabbat.
So what does that mean? What does that pasuk in the Torah mean? Lo tavaru esh. Does it mean you shall not kindle, or does it mean you shall not have a light lit in your home? Now the grammar, according to the Karaites, points to the latter, not to the former. In Rabbinic Judaism,
Bi'er means kindle, which is why Rabbinic Judaism prohibits starting a fire on Shabbat. The vast majority of Karaite Jews hold that throughout the Bible, ba explicitly meant to burn, while the Hebrew word meaning to ignite or to kindle is hidlik.
So there we are. You have a bit of a challenge there as a rabbinite. Accordingly,
the Karaite mainstream takes the passage to mean that fire should not be left burning in a Jewish home on Shabbat, regardless of whether it was lit prior to or during the Shabbos. Historically, Karaites refrained from using or deriving benefit from fire, and accordingly, their homes were not lit during the night of Shabbos. Contemporary Karaites strictly forbid the use of electricity on Shabbat.
So if you know a Karaite and you visit them on Shabbat, no electricity allowed. Is bi'er lo tavaru to kindle, as we say, or is it to have a light burning, as the grammar would seem to propose? Interesting. Brian.
I believe they also disconnect on the basis of electricity. The 40,000 Karaites that live in this country disconnect their refrigerators on Shabbat.
Absolutely. They have no electricity on Shabbat. Okay?
It's not just a question, not of the grammar, but of the word. You know, the vocabulary, like tava'er is an active, not a question of it shall be burning. It's just because it's...
They say lo tavaru is a grammatical form of having something burning. And they have quite a bit of proof for that.
I mean, I can see why bo'er is different.
Bo'er, different from Ladnik. I'm arguing with the party on my left. Guess who she is? Okay. So, Brian, could we have a bit of ritual impurity, please?
All Karaites follow certain Torah laws, avoiding too much met. Ritual impurity caused by contact with a dead body, human bones, graves, or being present in a space under any ceiling where a human died. These laws are no longer considered relevant in Rabbinic Judaism, except for Kohanim.
Now that's a big difference. But if you think about Tuman Torah, most of the book of Vayikra and much of the Torah is filled with Tuman Torah. So they keep it, we don't. Brian, Sfirat HaOmer and Shavuot, very contemporary.
The Karaites' method of counting the days from the offering of the Omer is different from the rabbinic method. The Karaites understand the term morrow after the Sabbath to refer to the weekly Sabbath.
Shabbat. Remember, we all sin, some of us, Usfartem lachem mimachorat haShabbat, which is the day after Shabbat, which is Sunday. So how can we count from the second day of Pesach? Doesn't say so in the Torah, does it? It says mimachorat haShabbat. To refer to
the weekly Sabbath, whereas Rabbinic Judaism interprets it as referring to the day after the festival of Pesach. Rabbinic Judaism begins the count on the 16th of Nisan and celebrates Shavuot on the 6th of Sivan. Karaite Jews count from the day after the weekly Sabbath, in other words, the Sunday, that occurs during the 7 days of Pesach, to the day after the 7th weekly Shabbat.
Imachorat HaShabbat tisperu 50 yom. So you go from Sunday to Sunday.
And they celebrate Shavuot on that Sunday, no matter what the calendar date of that Sunday on which it happens to fall.
Now, we rabbinic Jews make a great effort to try and justify why Machorat HaShabbat is the day after Pesach. We go to the book of Yoshua, where it says, Over HaPesach. Apparently, the day after Pesach is when you start and you can eat the new produce. But it's a big question. Let's have a look at the next one. What do Karaites do about tzitzit, for example? Jack, back to you, I think. Line 31. If you can unmute, Jack.
Okay.
Great.
The
The thread of the chelet.
The thread of the chelet is a blue thread which, according to the traditions of Rabbinic Judaism, is dyed with a specific kind of dye and derived from a mollusk, excuse me, notably the Hexaples trunculus sea snail, due to a number of factors, including Rome outlawing the use of the chelet by commoners.
Because it was royal purple. It was reserved for Roman dignitaries. The source and practice.
The source and practice of using a chelet thread in tzitzis was lost for most rabbinic Jews. The tzitziot are usually all white.
We, of course, have a new fashion to put in a blue thread, but okay. For most of diaspora Jewry, it was all white. Karaite Jews
believe that the chelet is the essence of the Torah commandment. Hence, it may be produced from any source, including synthetic industrial dyes. In their view, the source of the biblical dye was indigo, or Isatis tinctoria, and they also grade the tzitzis differently.
So there we are. What's more important? Tefillin. Next. Julian, I can see you, so let's have a bit of tefillin here, which is quite dramatic, actually.
Karaite Jews do not wear tefillin in any form. According to Karaites, the biblical passages cited for this practice are metaphorical and mean to remember the Torah always and treasure it. This is because the commandment in Scripture is, and these words which I command you this day shall be upon your heart, and thou shalt bind them for a sign upon your hand, and they shall be for forehead ornaments between your eyes.
Totafot, okay, but al yadecha ubein einecha. Since words
cannot be on one's heart or bound on one's hand, the entire passage is to be understood metaphorically.
There we are. Muzuzot, very similar, okay? Shmuley, like tefillin.
Karaites interpret the scripture that mandates inscribing Torah on doorposts and city gates as a metaphorical admonition, specifically to keep Torah at home and away. The previous commandment is tefillin, and just as
before mezuzah, okay?
And just as tefillin is metaphorical, so is mezuzah. Many Karaites, however, do have a small plaque with the Ten Commandments on the doorposts, and a Christian account in the 19th century tells of a Karaite synagogue in Constantinople that reportedly had a mezuzah. In Israel, in an effort to make rabbinic Jews comfortable, many Karaite Jews do put up mezuzot, but not out of belief that it is commanded.
Okay, now very interesting is the next bit. Ian, I think it's yours.
And that's appropriate.
Thank you, Shmuel. Mamzerim.
I don't have to comment on everything. Mamzerim. In both Deuteronomy 23:3 and Zechariah 9:6, the Hebrew word mamzer is referenced alongside the nation of Ammon and Moab. In Deuteronomy 23:3.
Okay, so this is very fascinating. In the Torah, Parshat Ki Tetzei, we have two psukim. One says, Lo yavo Ammoni uMoavi bikal Hashem, gam dor asiri lo yavo lahem ad olam. In other words, an Ammonite or a Moabite is not allowed to marry into the Jewish people, not even the 10th generation. They are excluded forever, okay? The next pasuk says, Lo yavo mamzer bikal Hashem, gam dor asiri, lo yavo. So this phrase, also the 10th generation, what does that mean? Does that mean that a mamzer of the 11th generation is admitted? Well, the answer, according to the Gemara, is no. Because you make Gzera Shava. Just as in the case of Ammon and Moab, the Torah qualifies Ador Asiri with the phrase Ad Olam, which means forever. So the Dor Asiri in relation to the Mamzer must mean forever. But Ammoni and Moavi are nations. Is a Mamzer a nation? Or is a Mamzer, as we understand it, the product of incest or adultery? We always understand it in halakha as being the product of adultery or incest. But what makes the plot more complicated is a pasuk in Zechariah. The pasuk in Zechariah says that they will come a mamzer from Ashdod. Now, what does that mean? It means, well, the prophet Zechariah is talking about the fall of the Philistine cities, of all the Philistine cities, of one of which is Ashdod. He says that Ashdod is going to fall, and the disgrace of Ashdod will be that there'll be a mamzer in Ashdod. Now, what does that mean? So the Karaites say, talking about the fall of Ashdod, we're talking about the fact that the Gaon Plishtim, the pride of the Philistines, will be reduced to rubble. And it means that a lowly nation will occupy their city. Ashdod was at the height of its power at the end of the Babylonian period. And what you have here is a prophecy that a lowly nation called the nation of Mamzer, like Ammon and Moab, will in fact occupy the city of Ashdod, the crown of Philistine achievement at the time. So that's why, Ian, would you please read on? And the Philistine cities
of Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, and Ashdod in Zechariah 9:5-6.
On this basis,
Karaites understand the Hebrew word mamzer to mean a nation or people, and not, as in Rabbinic Judaism, as a reference to the products of adulterous or incestuous unions.
So how do we understand the pasuk? Well, we understand the pasuk. Rashi and Ibn Ezra say very simple. We are going to export our mamzerim to Ashdod. Okay, we're going to take all of our mamzerim, the products of adulterous, incestuous unions that we can't marry anyhow, and we'll do a transfer of all the mamzerim. They'll go to Ashdod, they'll go to Ashkelon, they'll go to the Philistine cities, including Gaza, and we will be rid of them, and we'll also reduce the status of Ashdod. Ibn Ezra says something very similar. And what's interesting is that the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Bible, also says that. Look up the pasuk in Zechariah after the Shiur when you have time. It's really an interesting point. The Septuagint renders the word mamzer in Zechariah as a foreigner, and the Peshitta says Nuchraya, foreigners. So is it possible that there's a group of people who are called mamzer? And it goes back, of course, to the etymology. We say
Probably the
mamzer
origin,
is,
probably the origin of the progressive Jews, probably.
and then that's why conservative movement, part of it says we don't take mamzerut seriously, because the mamzerim are just like the Ammonim and the Moavim. They're not here anymore. Now that would be a good let off the hook for Orthodox Judaism, okay, if mamzer wasn't a mamzer. But we say that the origin of mamzer is mumzar. Oh, as we did something against, we broke a very serious taboo, incest or adultery, and it helps keep family purity and family integrity. Now, the other interpretation that Abraham Geiger offered in his time, mamzer could be me'amzar, from a foreign people. So there you are. Is it mumzar? Is it me'amzar? Rabbi Yehuda ben Bal'am, 11th century rabbinic commentator, wrote Arabic commentators on Tanakh. He says he doesn't see why, from a pshat point of view, mamzer may very well be more of a nation than products of adultery or incest, but the Kabbalah, the halachic tradition, tells us that the mamzer is in fact not a different nation, but is in fact the halachic status that we understand. But the Karaites got rid of the issue of mamzerut. Okay, now this topic was a major one. Ian, would you finish off, please? Line 24.
In the major one in the debates between Rabbinites and Karaites in the Middle Ages.
Now, from this one sentence, you'll get the sense that during the Middle Ages, especially in Egypt, in the golden age of Karaism, there's a lot of interaction between Rabbinites and Karaites as to what the Torah actually means. And there's a lot of scholarship. Rabbinic scholars defended the traditional halachic interpretation of the Torah. Very famous champion was Sadi Gaon, who wrote against Anan ben David. And all of this dispute generated a huge amount of interest in understanding Torah, grammar, history, what the Torah and the Psukim actually mean. And to this day, Orthodox rabbis, think about Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman, or Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg, or the Malbim, they seek, or the Gaon of Vilna, to find a proper biblical basis in the Torah for the halachic tradition. So it also gave rise to a lot of very interesting intellectual discussion and work. And as you'll see from here, Rabbinites and Karaites did discuss a lot at that time. Question then arises, and this is what the Rambam is going to be dealing with, as to whether you should actually engage in such discussions at all. Should we be discussing with heretics? Okay, the four species.
How did the Karaites treat the product of incest and adultery? Did they accept them as normal citizens?
They accept them as a sinner, yes. Your parents were sinful, but there's nothing wrong with you. You can be married into the Karaite Jewish community. Exactly. Pretty shocking from the point of view of rabbinic Jews. And the Arba Minim is another interesting aspect. And let's see, Brian, would you give us the four species? Finish off our little tour of Karaism.
Karaite Jews have always understood the Arba'at Haminim to be used for the purpose of constructing the roof of the sukkah. They are not made into a lulav and shaken in 6 directions, as is the rabbinic practice. In the book of Nehemiah, the Israelites are instructed to construct their sukkot out of 4 species: olive branches and oil tree branches, it's pri hadar, as well as the date palm fronds, myrtle branches, and branches of thickly leaved trees, as are mentioned in the same passage as materials for the sukkah's construction.
And this is the pasuk. Vayimtzu katuv b'Torah. They found written in the Torah, times of Nehemiah, Asher tziva Hashem yad Moshe, which God had commanded Moshe, Asher yeshu b'nei Yisrael b'Sukkot, b'chag b'chodesh hashvi. Sukkot, which is in the 7th month in Tishrei, the Israelites should sit in Sukkot. Asher yashmiu, vayaviru kol b'chol areihem Yerushalayim leimor. And then the message was sent out to all the Jews at the time, Suahar, go to the mountain and bring alei zayit, branches of olive trees, and branches of oil trees, and hadassim, and lulavim, and myrtle trees to make Sukkot, as it is written. So some of these are used to make the Sukkot. So the Karaites said the 4 kinds are to make the Sukkot. Rabbinic interpretation splits it up, of course, and says that in the mountains, they went for the alei tamarim and alei shemen, okay, which they used for schach. But the others, they used for shaking. There's no reference to shaking or arba minim. And finally, Brian, Jewish identity.
Do they accept that the Priye Sadar is an etrog?
They accept that it is an etrog, yes. Because they also have to interpret. Most Karaites follow
patrilineal descent, meaning a Jew is someone whose father is Jewish, since almost all Jewish descent in the Bible is traced along the patrilineal line.
Now, this is another interesting topic. Where did the idea of your mother establishing your identity come from? If you look at the Torah, it says Ish levet avot. Your tribal lineage was determined by your father. Your inheritance came through your father. Bet avotam. When did the mothers come into the picture? Now the Gemara in Kiddushin, Rav Samach Vav, says that it came in very early on, because in the book of Devarim it talks about not taking a non-Jewish son-in-law because he will turn your Jewish grandson away from me because he's Jewish, because his mother is Jewish. But that's a fairly complicated drasha. So where do we know about the matrilineal principle? Karaites say doesn't exist. You Rabbinites just invented it. Why? Well, I hear a voice on my left saying because we need to preserve our demography, and Jewish women raped by Roman soldiers or anyone else, well, we should take the kids and treat them as Jews. Also, of course, it could be the Roman law concept. We always know the mother, but do we know the father? Practically speaking, could be anyone. Correct, Brian?
Absolutely.
In the pre-genetic age, no way of knowing who is not the father. So therefore, practically speaking, whereas the Karaites say, look at the Tanakh. It has to be the father. When was there a change? When did it happen? All of that is another fascinating topic. But now I'm going to give you, in the time we have left, Maimonidean approach to charism and dealing with Karaites. The two things are different. So let's begin. In his commentary on the Mishnah of Avot, Rambam says that, well, there were 2 students, Sadok and Baitus, okay, and they were students of Antignos Ish Socho, who said there's no reward for keeping the Torah, from which they derived that, well, there's no such thing as the world to come, and why should we keep religion at all? But they couldn't throw religion out entirely. So what they did was they threw out the rabbinic part. They kept what was written in scripture to make life easier from them. So let's have a look at line 17. Uminei az samchu ela kitot ha'arurot. So these cursed groups started then, kilot haminim asher yikaru ba'aretz hazot, which are called in this country. Where did Rambam live and flourish?
Egypt.
Egypt, exactly. Ritzoni lomar Mitzrayim, Karaim. The Karaim are the descendants of Tzadok and Baitos, who were heretics. Ushmam etzel hachachamim tzilukinu baitusin. They are called by those names. And they began to cast doubt on halachic tradition, on the rabbinic tradition. And they began to interpret the psukim of the Torah freely, as they saw it, without respecting the voices of the past. But God himself said, do not deviate to the left or the right from what the rabbis tell you, the ones who are teaching you Torah. Now, this is the Rambam's definition. And then what else does he say? He says that if there is a Tzeduki or a Baitusi, that is a Karaite, okay, and they of course are going in darkness and they do not know the truth, you are allowed even today to treat them as serious sinners, and if they happen to fall into a pit, do you have to rescue them? The answer is no. Moridin velo ma'alin. And he says that this applies shemutar lahorgeim hayom bisman hagalut afela. Halachically speaking, they should be treated as serious sinners, and their deaths should be compassed. Kedei shelo yatet Israel. Because what are they going to do? They're going to contaminate us, lead us astray. Okay? And right through the West in Spain, they would deal in a summary way with Karaite heretics. אבל אלו אשר נולדו בדעות אלה וחונכו על פיהן, הרי הם כאנוסים ודינם דין תינוק שנשבע, לבין הגויים שכל עבירותיו שגגה כמו שבהרו, והמתחיל הראשון הוא מזיד לא שוגג. A very important principle the Rambam slips in here. He says, if you are born and bred as a Karaite, and you didn't come to it out of conviction, then we treat you as an inadvertent sinner. You're not treated harshly. Only if you really push the doctrine and you act like Tzadok and Baitos, and you believe in attacking the rabbinical tradition, then we're going to deal with you very harshly. And this is how the Rambam sums up the law in his Hilchot Mamrim, in his Mishneh Torah. Now I'm on line 3 on page 5, and now we're going to read the Responsa. Remember, there is a code of law, and Rambam is great for this distinction. Code of law is very clear. Heretics with conviction are to be treated harshly. Don't converse with them. Try and get rid of them if you can. Okay? They are beyond the pale. But those who cannot help themselves, who are born and bred into this heresy, then we treat them as inadvertent sinners. That's what you get from the code of law. But what you get from Responsa, from an actual question, and here we're going to read the Rambam's tshuva. Sheila me'inyana karaim. Ech hitnagu harabanim imahem. How should we deal with them? B'milat b'neihem. Do we circumcise their children on Shabbat? Brit Milah is in the Torah. Karaite circumcised. They needed mohelim from the rabbinical community. Uveshelat shlomam. And should we greet them? V'lalechet b'vatehem. Should we go and visit and socialize with them? Ume'inyan yenam. And is their wine permitted or not? Tshuva. My response. Omer ki ela karaim shochnim po. The Karaites living here in No Amon, which is Thebes, which is Egypt. Uve Eretz Mitzrayim and the rest of Egypt. Uve Damascus and in Damascus. Uve Shar Mukomot Eretz Ishmael v'Zulatam and other places in the Muslim world. Ru'yim hem lechalkam mechalkei kavod. We should treat them with dignity and respect. Ulitkarev etzlam b'maaseh yosher. And when we have dealings with them, we have to deal with them with integrity and honesty. Ulitaheg imahem b'midat ha'anava. And be humble. V'derech ha'emet v'shalom. And our guide should be truth and peace. Kol zman shegam hem yinhagu imanu bitmimut. If they treat us in a similar way. In other words, Rambam replaces the theory of heresy with a theory of reciprocity. We have to be nice to people who are nice to us, even if we disagree fundamentally on theological matters. Ve'asiru mehem apshut pe v'lazut safa miladaber to'al chachmei harabanim. They do not cast aspersions and degrade our rabbinical authorities. Then we respect them. Especially if they treat our tradition with respect. The Tanaim and the Chachmei Mishnah, the Talmud, שבדבריהם והמנהגים הקבועים לנו מפיהם ומפי משה הגבורה אנו הולכים. Because they are the way in which we live our lives. There's mutual respect and reciprocity, then we should act in respectful, humble, honest fashion full of integrity. ובזאת יכול לנו לכבדם וללכת לשאול בשלומם. So we honor them, we go and ask after their welfare, אפילו בבתיהם, we go to their homes ולמול את בניהם ואפילו בשבת. And we will circumcise a Karaite boy even on Shabbat. ולקבור מתיהם, we will bury their dead in our cemeteries, ולנחם אבליהם, and we will comfort those who are mourning. Interested to compare perhaps with the Rambam's words in the Middle Ages to contemporary rabbis in the Orthodox world who may have had a problem with nichum avelim of those who belonged to a different movement. Okay? וראיה לדבר הוא דתנן בגיטין פרק הנזקין בסופו, מחזיקין ידי גויים בשביעית, ושואלים בשלומם מפני דרכי שלום. Rambam says, look, you have to be nice to non-Jews because we want to preserve peaceful relations with them. ומעשים רבים בתלמוד יוכיחו. I'm not going to give you all the details, but the Talmud has many stories of rabbis who were very respectful of non-Jews. ואם בעובדי עבודה זרה כן, and if we have to be nice on a reciprocal basis to non-Jews, קל וחומר how much more במי שכופר בכל חוקי הגויים, to Jews who reject the Gentile world, okay, ומודה באל יתעלה שמו, they accept God, שמותר לנו לשאול בשלומם ואפילו בבתיהם. Okay, so that I think is as much as we're going to read today. The rest of it we'll read tomorrow, and then I have some fascinating tshuvot next week on the whole issue of the relationship with the Karaites later on in the 15th and 16th centuries in the Sephardic world, where they did count. So what we have here, I'm stopping the share, is the beginning of a discussion as to how to deal with heretics. Okay? So if I can call everybody to attention. Michael? Okay, we have come to the end. We're doing well. All right. Fabia?
Yes, a question.
There's a question. Good, okay.
Rambam doesn't speak at all of the issue, are we allowed to marry with them? What's the problem with the fact that they are
possibly mamzerim,
because
they don't have the same laws of Gittin. And who did address that question? Which famous rabbi in Egypt in the 15th century? Radbaz. Radbaz has a famous tuvah. We're going to read his tuvah. Tune in next week. We'll talk about the marriage. and we'll see how hard the Radbaz works to make sure that we can marry into the Karaite community. How does he do it? Next week. But the important point here is to see the difference between the code and the Responsa, the Mishneh Torah, Perush la Mishnah, and the Tshuva, which is real life. Karaite community in Egypt was very important. They were necessary. They also stimulated an interesting discussion. And rabbinical scholars like Ibn Ezra would dialogue with Karaite scholars in order to perhaps find a richer approach to Torah and what it means and what the role that tradition plays. And this is an issue that we deal with to this day, connecting our Torah Shabbat Peh, our halakha, what's actually written in the words of the Mikra. So that teaching Karaites, the idea of perhaps it makes us richer to deal with people who disagree with us, rather than talking to people who agree with us all the time. That may be, as we'll see from the Tshuva of Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi, which we'll read next week, which is fascinating for its historical detail, and learn something about the need to enrich ourselves by hearing different voices and not listening to the same voice all the time. So there we are. That's it for this week. Jean, you can send me an email if you want to.
No, I have only one remark.
Okay.
I looked for Tshuva in the Shuta Radvaz, number 2796, and at my surprise, this Tshuva was skipped. If in the edition, it's the Varsha edition, you will not find it. You find 2795 and 97. And it
Exactly. Reminds me of when I spent some time in Gateshead Yeshiva, and I pulled out the Tshuvot of Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg.
Yes.
He has one on mixed groups, Shiur, a mixed group. And I opened up Chelik Gimel, and guess what? It wasn't there. We have a means of censoring within the Orthodox world. And once you start me on that subject, Jean, we could spend another 2 hours. Rav Kook's name is cut out of Haskamot that were in the original works, because the Talmidim and the Haredim didn't want this book attributed to Rav Kook, and it happened with Tshuvot. And this Radbaz, which we're going to read, is fascinating for that very reason, but it's very dangerous if you think about it from a Haredi perspective. So more on that, all being well next week. We'll say good evening, Besorot Tovot, and tune in for more of the same, or different actually, same channel, same time. Erev Tov, good evening.
Erev Tov, thank you.
My pleasure.
Toda.
Hello.
Alo davar. See you next. Bye for now. Bye.
Bye.